Yeah, okay. So seriously in the deep end if I'm going to host this thing. It's been a while since I attended these meets. That was all last year. Anyway, that's some preamble. So I thought what might be helpful is to start out with a discussion about the man himself, Bertrand Russell. So any sort of anecdotes or trivia or anything at all, feel free to put something in the middle there. I found out a couple of things today about him.
Oh,
quite
cool.
Interesting. So I'll start with one thing there. Well, first off, he's British, and he did some time for nuclear activism, I believe. Feel free to fact check any of this. So he was pretty hardcore against England becoming a nuclear power, and he actually had this idea that the Allies should go ahead and nuke Russia or the USSR early in the game before they acquired too many warheads of their own. He later retracted that view as being, well, I'm not sure for what reasons, but obviously. But anyway, his theory was the reason to do that was before things escalated to the point that there was enough for mutually assured destruction, and also the risk of, a critical error or miscalculation, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're sort of approaching another melting point with the escalation in Ukraine, which could trigger something much bigger. So, yeah, that's a little bit about him. So he's also known for being a mathematician. So it's quite interesting people that come to philosophy with another set of credentials or another academic qualification, and how that sort of leads their philosophy potentially.
Yeah, he was very strongly in the analytics school, so a lot of focus on logic and maths.
Yes, with Whitehead, he wrote a whole tome on logic. They practically rewrote the logic of their day in new terms, and that took them about 10 years to write, I think.
Yeah, and he was a teacher or colleague of Wittgenstein as well, I believe.
Yeah, teacher. Wittgenstein basically like rocked up to the uni and was like, "Hey, I want you to be my teacher."
Pretty much. I think
Russell was like, "Yeah, I like the cut of your jib. Let's do it."
I think he felt, was it those two that fell out? I know Wittgenstein fell out really severely with someone he was very close to.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he fell out with yeah.
I can't remember of the anecdote, but did he attack someone with a poker or something? A fire poker?
Yeah, there is this, I can't remember who it was, but I believe it's like being like as confirmed as these things can be. It did happen, but I forgot who he attacked. He also like Wittgenstein was like apparently he was maybe getting like slightly off track, but he was also a teacher for a little bit, and like apparently he was really harsh with the students, like just thrashing them, because obviously in those days they had like the cane and stuff. Yeah.
The school, he ran a school with his wife at the time. He had several wives, and he ran a school with the wife, the current wife, and it only lasted a few years. And he declared that it wasn't a success, but he had very strong views on education.
Wow. So we've got a lot to say about Wittgenstein, less to say about Russell.
Just to link back to Russell, like one of the other things I like is the Principia, I'm going to mispronounce Mathematica or whatever.
Yeah, Principia Mathematica.
Yeah, that he had like the funny tidbit of that is like it's like page 100 proves that 1 + 1 = 2 or something like that. It's always the classic of that there. I think
Go on, Shannon. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say there was like a really fun. I don't know if I have it at hand. There's a really cool like comic book. I think it's called Logica or something, Logic X or something like that, which actually talks about like the philosophy around this time, like, and Russell plays like a large part in that. It's really interesting, like, so it sort of goes through like all the different views on logic at the time and the ways they were challenged, and yeah.
That's great. Lots of things to follow up. All right, Vincent, jump on in.
So here's another thought. I don't know if you guys have done this before, but with a text that's relatively short, there is an option of actually physically reading the text out loud. Is that something you've done, or is that you think is useful?
Definitely parts of it, at least, because there's some really good quotes. You know, it's full of good material.
Yeah, we could probably like maybe like go through the each page and see if people got comments and stuff on that and go from there. That would be like the usual way we'd go through it. I think reading through it, reading out loud, I think that'll probably eat into the time, but I think there's a lot there to discuss, even though it is very short. But yeah,
Okay.
up to you. You have authoritarian control. Impose your will upon us.
That's right. And I can't actually look at the text, because when I do, I have a PDF player, and it always causes my Zoom to crash for some reason. So I always take notes beforehand.
Oh.
So I'm always doing it off the top of my head and the notes that I've got. I'm never looking at the text. That's how amazing I am.
Have you tried a different PDF like reader?
I should, but I'm too lazy.
Fair enough. That's perfectly anyway.
Just on the technical note, I've got a new laptop than last year, and I can't actually access the camera. So I'm using my phone. I'll show you my setup just real quick. So there's the text. It's actually on my computer. I can't do that, so I'm using a cell phone, which is why I'm looking down. But it's quite good because the light from the screen illuminates your face, and then you can see it's right there. So anyway, the paragraphs aren't numbered, but they do have a starting letter. So we're on L, if you guys can see that. Maybe not Courtney, but it's the first chunk.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got there, we start out with Satan finds some mischief for idle hands to do. So this is an idea that has historical as well as biblical roots. This idea, what's the other one? Idle time is the devil's plaything, something to that effect. So then he talks about his own history being a highly virtuous child. I do believe he came from wealth, so he wasn't obliged to work necessarily.
Can I jump in there? I was really interested in that line because I remember people used to say that, didn't they? That idiom. They used to say, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop," and things like that. So I looked it up, and apparently it first appeared in Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. And then I got distracted. Instead of reading the text, I went to the Bible because of the obvious link to scripture. And it's apparently, I don't know how this connects, but apparently people think it's related to Proverbs 16:27, which in the Living Bible translation, which is only from 1971, says that idle hands are the devil's workshop, idle lips are his mouthpiece. But that's a really modern translation. So I went back a bit further, and there's this American Standard Version that says, completely different, a worthless man devises mischief, and in his lips there is a scorching fire. So you go from worthless to idle. And then if you go back to the King James, because that's the one we all grew up with, which is a much older one, of course, it goes, an ungodly man diggeth up evil, and in his lips there is a burning fire. So we've gone from the devil's workshop, idle hands are the devil's workshop, idle lips are his mouthpiece. Back a few hundred years, it's an ungodly man diggeth up evil, and in his lips there is a burning fire. And the word that they use to translate idol, apparently in the Hebrew, is Belial or Belial, which is a personification of Satan. So anyway, I got massively distracted, but I was quite interested in how this idiom has evolved, apparently from a completely different meaning in the Bible to somehow becoming about idleness, even though it's about worthlessness or ungodliness. It's an incredible kind of transition over time. But anyway, thanks for entertaining my You have to understand one thing about me is that as I get older, people say I've got ADHD because I don't think in a straight line. I just think all over the place.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's, yeah, it's helpful to know the origins of words and stuff in that context. There's a history lesson along with the ride, and you're a former English teacher. That's understandable. That's a byproduct of that journey.
And how do you think it fits then for Russell to start with that idiom, I guess is the point. Obviously, it's a connection to his Christian moral upbringing and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think that really kind of brings people into the thinking. I mean, that's a phrase that's been used a lot. And in 1932, when he wrote this, I would say that would have more currency today than it does today. So it would certainly, and it would have an emotive context. As soon as you talk about bring the devil into the conversation, it's quite heavy. So yeah, I think it helps set the scene a bit.
And I must admit, from a modern perspective, though, it already inflamed my prejudices because I got raised by a father who was a farmer, and he would have said the same things to me growing up. So I've always felt like if I'm not being productive, that I'm wasting time. And he's the kind of guy, when you're driving around with him and he sees people loafing around, he'll be like, look at that lazy bum, Look there, I bet he's on the dole. They're all on the dole. They're all a bunch of lazy layabouts, all that stuff. So yeah, I can relate.
Cool. Okay, so from there's talk about there's other historical references, I suppose. They're talking about a traveler in Naples, and then seeing some beggars, and then he mentions it was before the days of Mussolini. So actually, at the time he wrote this, they were between First and Second World War, and at that time Mussolini had taken power over Italy, and Hitler was climbing into the bootstraps himself. And it's interesting too, he talks about those countries that do not enjoy Mediterranean sunshine. Idleness was more difficult. Because I remember reading somewhere that there was this assumption by Europeans that traveled to tropical countries and stuff when they were exploring the world, that those that lived without technology and things were just miserable, living in relative squalor, but they found quite the opposite. So people in Northern European countries like England and so forth, they worked around the clock, and a lot of it was survival because the winters were so harsh and life wasn't as abundant. Whereas, in Tahiti or places like that, people could get by with a lot less. It wasn't a big quest to stock away food necessarily for the winter and to collect fuel and those things. So that really helps paint a picture of it being kind of circumstantial to where you are as well. So there's all these different drawing pins put in the map and a timeline too, to try and draw people in different ways. So as a biblical quote, there's talking about Mussolini, it's current, and also some references go further back.
And that Florentine story or whatever was a kind of humorous anecdote, wasn't it? He said something like, I offered to pay the laziest man there, and they all got up except for one, so I paid the guy who didn't get up, something like that.
Yeah, the beggar story about the beggars, the 12 beggars.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I always love as well when authors are like, oh yeah, everyone knows this story, and you're like, what? What the hell are you talking? I don't know how to this. Obviously, there's like 100 years gap. But
yeah, and that's really interesting when you're reading Plato, and he's like, as the common phrase goes, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
It's absurd.
And then it's like, you like look it up, and it's like, oh, okay, it's only referenced in Plato. We've got like this tiny little fragment from what we think is this work, and
yeah, classic.
It's like the assumptions that are brought into the work. But yeah, I think this paragraph does a good job of setting it up. I think it's the sort of way it's going to go. I probably didn't have.
How'd you feel off the bat? I was kind of standoffish, I must admit, and I was thinking straight away that, Russell would have been really pleased with Timothy Leary's tune in and drop out sentiment of the 1960s, because he says something like, there needs to be a campaign by YMCA to induce good men to do nothing. And I was like, if only he knew what Timothy Leary will do later on, kind of thing.
I would say I was probably more positive about this before I read through it. Which we'll get to. But yeah, there's some parts which I think are a little questionable.
Yeah. I was thinking of you, Shannon, because there's some sort of blanket statements like loaning money to the government makes you kind of complicit in murder, basically. And I was thinking Shannon will like that.
I did highlight that. Yep. Yeah, I hate my blanket statements. But like the whole idea really talks to me, at least like I feel this pressure of like, oh, you've got to like monetize everything. Like, especially like I'm doing job applications at the moment, and it's like, oh, what's your interests and stuff like this? Like, you've got to be this full person that you have to sell. Like you're just this complete product. So there is something kind of like the general idea speaks to me at least. But yeah, that would be my thoughts.
What about you guys? Like, I think that's an interesting question. I got really caught, like at the beginning I was standoffish until he starts to talk about power and how work is kind of, kind of the virtue of work, all that sort of stuff is used as a kind of method of social control by those who can utilize the propaganda to control the people. That sort of stuff interests me. So I was like, ooh, this is more like it. That's where I got roped in.
Yeah, he was speaking historically, that that over the centuries, that, oh wow, where was I? Sorry. Historically, that people were always expected to work hard, and any profit, they were meant to work really, really hard, many, many hours, and any profit was taken by warriors and priests. And many workers, of course, were unhealthy or died of hunger or whatever. But that whole desirability for work is derived from that whole global system, because he referred to the whole global system, both East and West, all over the world. And it was only in the 20th century, around the time he was born, that things started to change and the working week dropped back, because he uses that example of England, before he was born, had in the 1800s, had 15-hour working days and 12 hours for children. And then when he was a little boy, that they only just started to bring in public holidays, and the wealthy thought, oh my gosh, why would the workers need public holidays? It was just outrageous. But anyway, yeah.
And there's a line here early on. You're right. You can tell me to shut up, Vincent. But just at the beginning, he says, what a man earns, he usually spends, and in spending, he gives employment. And just tying it into what Jody's saying, that's all good and fine, unless you're talking about the kind of Protestant movement. And I was interested in that because it links to the whole Christian morality thing. And I looked it up. I got a bit distracted again. And, according to Weber, he wrote a book on the Protestant work ethic. He said that capitalism in Northern Europe evolved when the Protestant ethic influenced large numbers of people to engage in work in the secular world, developing their own enterprises and engaging in trade and accumulation of wealth for investment. In other words, the Protestant work ethic was an important force behind the unplanned and uncoordinated emergence of modern capitalism. So what's interesting about the Protestants is they weren't after the money per se. They held as a virtue this ability to work hard and to be frugal and spendthrift and self-reliant and all these kind of new, they're almost new Christian virtues. And Weber's trying to say that, well, he's saying that's instrumental in the rise of capitalism. So that's quite interesting in itself, because it kind of undercuts what he's saying, because these guys are earning money, but they're not spending it. A lot of them become rich industrialists and the like because they earned tons of money and kept it in their families or reinvested it in their businesses.
Yeah, some of his economic ideas seem a little bit off. I mean, the idea that by saving, it removes money from circulation, and that it would be better to throw a party. He uses that example. But yeah, I mean, he does go on to say, well, strictly speaking, that is like someone who hoards it under a mattress or whatever, so thus removing it from the economy entirely. But the whole concept of saving is that you put it in a bank and then they lend it out and retain a fraction, and so it expands, you know. And again, going back to what you said, Shannon, too, about how the idea that well, you pointed out too, Courtney, that lending money to governments is paramount to paying off some villain in a Shakespeare thing. I mean, that's all to do with the time and place that he wrote this. So he was in the early 30s. He would have been fully aware that that we were, the other name for the First World War was the war to end all wars, but it wasn't that. And so yeah, I think he had his finger on the pulse there and saw that buying government bonds and so forth was just it would be tanks and bombs, that sort of thing. Yeah,
definitely, because he's talking about war quite a bit in this piece too, isn't he? So it's obviously in his mind.
Well, this essay itself was part of a book of essays, wasn't it? And the other essays in the book, a lot of them were about the political mood at the time involving because he was against both the communists and the fascists, and so he really, anyway.
Yeah, just
Sorry, go on.
trickle down the text a little bit more. We're on to paragraph B.
Yeah, there's is that the one where it starts to say that there's two kinds of work? That the first one is moving things around, and the second one is telling people how to move things around. So there's the people that move the things around, and then the other kind of work are the people that tell the people to move things around. And then he said that splits off, and that becomes also the people who give advice to the people who tell the people to move things around.
Yeah. And it's often two opposite kinds of advice.
And that's called politics. And that's called politics, the art of persuasion, which doesn't need the knowledge of the subject, and where the advice is needed, but it's only just it's like advertising.
Yeah, and it brings us strongly back to the same sentiment that Socrates has about the sophists and the who were they? The orators in the Gorgias is exactly the same thing. Yeah.
When I read that, oh, sorry, go Shannon.
No, all I was going to say is maybe we should let Vincent bring us back to the book, which I think is what he's trying to do.
Oh, okay. So there was some confusion because it wasn't actually. We went from the first paragraph, jumped down about 5 or 6, but actually the ones prior covered, because we talked about saving and how that, and whether that's better than, say, throwing a party, for instance, talking about wars and government bonds and so on. So yeah, we basically did arrive at this place. I just wanted to make a comment that when I read that, I thought, moving objects around the surface of the earth, that makes me think of people cutting stone out of a quarry and building pyramids or something, or else maybe, in New Zealand in the Great Recession, they had men just digging ditches, just so they were doing some physically moving things, but actually in the end they sometimes got filled up by another group of guys. But I also took it to think, well, what does that mean about mental work? Maybe that is moving things on the surface of the earth, if you mean, reshuffling neural connections or, intellectual capital, like what he's doing, writing a book. Is that moving things
Yeah.
surface. And it's quite a narrow definition unless you take it liberally like that, I think. But it's still quite pertinent about how there's the, you know, the people ordering those to work versus the ones doing it. And that sort of echoes the system that was in place before that, you know, with feudalism and aristocracy and all the different systems of social control.
Yeah, I had exactly the same thought, like where you were going of like, oh, what do these lines actually mean? And then I was also thinking about it, like if you think of programming, I think a lot of people have like these really weird, like there's almost a magical element to it where it's like supernatural, like it's not physical, but like when you're programming, like there is actually a computer that you're telling to do the things that physically is moving, like it's very physical what it's actually doing. So would that, like that would seem like it would count as like physical, but then like you were also saying, I then started wondering like, well, like if you're like some sort of materialist about the mind, then that is also, you know, physical things moving around. Yeah, I guess I think which I think sort of the point you were sort of making, like it is like a pretty that there's a reasonable summary of work in the sense of like there are people that do things, and then you have people who manage them, and then you have people who help the people who manage them to optimize that. That's probably a pretty like reasonable way to look at work. And there's probably like some circumstances where some roles cross over those three categories.
I'd be hesitant to put that sort of work in there, the intellectual work. And the reason is because I think in the background, he's talking about leisure has become a right evenly distributed amongst the classes, he says. And what makes that possible is technology. So, for example, you can get machines to do lifting work. You can get machines to make things. And so that means that people have free time all of a sudden. And that's kind of the point of what he's going on about is what happens when we get to the point when technology can kind of do the bulk of the kind of, you know, laborious work. What will people do with their free time? Will they be able to use it wisely in a kind of educated and civilized way or not? You know, that's kind of a theme that comes out towards the end. So I don't know about intellectual work. Obviously, it must be there in the background, but even this idea, like as he said, there was a third class in Europe, but not in America, and that was the people who owned the land, and they gave the people the kind of what do you call it? That gave them the ability to work the land on their behalf and a place to live, and obviously the lords, and that signifies ownership of the land. But in all those cases, the people working the land have the lowest kind of, they're basically slaves, aren't they? And in Aristotle's view, a slave is a living tool. So it kind of fits in the background because once you've got a machine tool to replace the living tool, you don't need slavery anymore. You don't need these laborers anymore. You got to do something with them still.
Well, the quote there that he uses is the morality of work is the morality of slaves, and the modern world has no need of slavery.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously very similar to Nietzsche, he's going to connect the virtue of doing your work, the virtue of that kind of duty, as if it was like a godly type thing, a godly form of virtue, is something that the ruling class use to spur the kind of workers on. But they're not paid accordingly. That's a point that he makes very clear. He says, a man should not receive wages in proportion to what he has produced, but in proportion to his virtue, as exemplified by his industry. So it means the people at the top, the ones telling the people what to do, are technically more virtuous because they get paid more than the people who are actually doing all the work. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Can I be a monster and jump us back just a little bit, just in the text, just before we get too far gone?
Go for it.
On the second page, starts with B paragraph. And it has this point which I thought was a little odd, where it's got in these days, however, no one will deny that most enterprises fail. That means that a large amount of human labor is wasted, basically, is what it says. But I was thinking, like, I'm not sure whether this is like completely true, because it seems like you can have, like, when an enterprise fails, that can either, one, like, it'll signal to others like that was a bad idea, or like the way they approached it was a bad idea. But two, there's like this sort of way that, like, I imagine there's like a technical economic word for it, but where you have business cannibalism, where basically you have, like, a restaurant fails, someone buys all the restaurant equipment for cheap, and then they start a restaurant. So they're basically leveraging the initial capital investment from that first business that helps the second, not in the sense that it's the same person, but just the next business is able to benefit from the failures of the previous to build upon what was there before. Does it? Yeah, it doesn't seem like as common to do. I feel like it's a bit too broad with.
Yeah, he sort of he crosses over into that type of idea, Shannon, doesn't he? When he's talking about the making of the pins. I won't jump there. I'm not going to go there yet. But that does come up in that story about the pins. You know, that failure of some businesses as opposed to others, that then some are working hard and others are underemployed or unemployed, you know, because of the success and failure of one business over another, because they're making
it's slightly different from what I'm saying. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's slightly different from what I'm saying. My point's more that, like, you have like a pin making business, that business goes under, and then a new business comes in that may be working in an adjacent area and purchases like the equipment and material of that previous business at a reduced rate from what that initial pin business purchased at. So they benefit from the first business's capital investment. Then they might also benefit from the fact that there are workers who are now unemployed that they're able to hire to bring that experience across. So it doesn't seem like in some ways, like, I do agree, obviously, like, business failing definitely does suck. Like, let's not get away from that. But it does seem that they can, like, where he's going, there's like no good to anyone. I think that's the part that I'm probably a bit like, well, like, there is like some sort of good, or it can benefit the community at large.
I saw the pin thing a bit different. I think it's probably bad to go to the pin, because the pin example was saying something slightly different.
No. So I'm not talking about the pin example in the text. Okay. I was more explaining what my point was with that as an analogy.
Yeah. My problem with what you're talking about is, do businesses really fail that much? Do enterprises really fail that much?
Because he's got, however, no one will deny that most enterprises fail. Well, that's not really true, is it?
No, I don't.
No, it is. Yeah, most businesses fail. I think it's like after 18 months.
Oh,
well,
like, it's pretty.
Maybe.
Like, I'm not sure what the percentage was at his time, but yeah, like, businesses failing is pretty
common.
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe, though, as a good enough excuse to make this sort of argument. I reckon he just put a whole bunch of money on a stock thinking he was going to get rich, and it went broke. And he's like, fuck that, I'm writing a paper about this.
Yeah, and also, again, the timing, you know, early 30s, that was the onset of the Great Depression. So,
that's a good point.
I mean, I do feel as though it's a shame that there's these loose kind of generalizations there that really detract from the overall essay, and this is yet another example.
But that's not a bad thing, because I think that reminds us that things were different back then, because all through this I was thinking, is it like that? And then I was thinking, wow, we're kind of fortunate, really, because some of the things he's alluding to we actually could do right now, in my opinion, with the technology and the internet and things like that. We're in a much more privileged position to actually have freedom and leisure in our life if we wanted to do it. A lot of in the middle class, at least, definitely.
Yeah, that's why this text jumped out to me. And like Shannon was saying, you know, in memory, sometimes things that you've read a long time ago sort of they become more than they really are. And maybe it's because they become more relevant. And as you're saying, Courtney, that's certainly true of this. You know, there's more conversations about a universal basic income, for instance. And apparently I heard something recently, like you guys may or may not know that the life expectancy in the US is in decline. And the reason for it is through with suicide and overdosing. And that's also connected with unemployment. And this is usually middle-aged American men that are topping themselves. And what they found is they looked at what their dying words were, if they've left letters and things. And usually it was something along the lines of being useless or worthless. So these are men that have lost their place. And I think that's important to remember, because what he's advocating all the way along is not such that people give up their work entirely. They just find a better balance.
Yeah.
People didn't work at all, then that would be very difficult for them to feel whole. And you know, when you think about aristocrats that didn't, they had to invent all these sort of trivial pursuits like pheasant hunting, or you know, sort of just melodrama, you know, that sort of thing. But the thing about it is, when I see people that have lives devoted to leisure, usually they're in bus shelters drinking cheap wine at, you know, in the morning. And so why is it, if they've got all this leisure time, they choose to not read philosophy or do something more constructive? I think there's status anxiety, the fact that they see all these people cruising around working and stuff, and they have very low status. They're trying to escape their reality. That's why alcohol is such a thing. And he mentions that too. So, you know, I suppose the leisure class that had all this time, and the aristocrats, they probably overindulged, but at least they had high status. So it wasn't like they're trying to anesthetize that. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, I'm going on a bunch of tangents here, but
that's good.
Just jumping back to that text, just one last point on that paragraph I was talking about, because like Courtney was mentioned about like positive changes. I find the last sentence in that paragraph kind of interesting, where I think there is a change, like a cultural change from his time to ours, where he's got nevertheless, when he becomes poor through failure of his investment, he'll be regarded as a victim of undeserved misfortune. Whereas the gay spendthrift, who spends his money philanthropically, oh God, I can't say that word, will be despised as a fool and a frivolous person. And so I think, if I'm reading this right, he's sort of saying that someone who's like giving charitably, is that what he's getting at? Like, that seems like very different now. Like you got things like, which probably there's definitely like problems, you can talk about it, but long-termism, where it's sort of like looking at things that give like long-term benefits. You also have businesses have like a larger interest in like corporate social responsibility and stuff. Like it does seem, if I'm sort of reading this sentence correctly, it does seem like something that has changed, because the way he's described it sounds very very negative, but I don't think it would be presented that way now with that type of person.
I think he was like he was obviously in support of that type of spending. He was obviously a great fan of it, but he was accusing society of being negative towards it. But him personally, he was really. I imagine, you know, he would have had a pretty jolly life, I'd say. You know, he had a fairly, as active as he was, he was in support of not a libertarian lifestyle, but almost, you know, like he had quite a series of wives and a broad social group, and he would have had a great life, I think. You know.
Here's a fun fact. The guy there was an analysis of this text I listened to today, and I can share the link if anyone's keen later. This guy was saying, who's a philosopher analyzing text, that he usually dislikes smoking and thinks it's you know, yeah, it's not the go, etc. But he said in Russell's case, he's glad that he was a smoker because it actually saved his life. And what happened was he was in, I think it was an aeroplane, and it crashed into the sea. And as it was, all the smokers were situated at the back of the plane, the rear. Those that weren't smoking, they went down and they were just buried in water and they couldn't escape and drowned. He had another 20-something plus years as a result of surviving that. But yeah, I kind of, the reason I think I mentioned that is that someone who, I guess it wasn't that obvious back then that it was related to cancer and stuff, but it might have something to do with that sort of frivolous life that he had, that he enjoyed a smoke and a sherry and an extra wife and whatever. He lived for, you know, he wasn't too, what's the word? I don't know, too zen, too much.
Stiff upper lip.
Life pleasures, you know, he had some of the, yeah.
I've read his history of philosophy, which is a bit of a tome. I've read most of it, and he's pretty negative on the Stoics. Just so you know, because yeah, for those sort of reasons, he thinks that they're on the wrong track and that we should enjoy our lives in a more hedonistic way. That you get that kind of, not like some sort of Dionysian supermodel or anything. Just, you know, just got to enjoy yourself. But you mentioned just before, Vincent, I think that, well, let me kind of add to it, is in the background here is the feeling that we should have more leisure for life to be more pleasurable and enjoyable. But hinging on that is this idea that he points at a few times, that just doesn't mean doing whatever you want and getting drunk or whatever. He really thinks that there needs to be some sort of cultivated form of leisure. So, and I think in the background, he's thinking of the ancients who had free time because they had slaves, because he mentions that. And, you know, obviously they invented mathematics and philosophy and art and all those sorts of things. So his argument really hinges on a big expectation, which is, how the fuck do you get the people with leisure to be more sophisticated in their use of leisure? That's a big ask, because nowadays, give a bunch of people another 4 hours in the day, they're just going to go play Minecraft for 4 hours.
Yeah, maybe.
Or Candy Crush.
Yeah. Well, that happened with COVID, and there was an author that, you know, reconnected this text based on that, you know, people, what they did with all that surplus time. I mean, yeah, some people, it was just like you and Andy one winter in Changchun, right? Like smashing zombies, wasn't it? Other people, you know, they wrote songs and music, and sorry, I just one example out of the past.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's true. It can go different ways. I suppose what would matter, what would lead people to using it time productively or otherwise might be the culture surrounding that. Whether there's some sort of associated guilt with it, and it's not encouraged and not facilitated. I mean, you would think that if that was a societal thing, that people had a 4-hour working day, that there might be things in place, activities organized on a community level for them. And there might be free art workshops. You know, he talks about the artist, the painter, who can explore his craft without without starving, worrying about his next meal, or people who have scientific interest. You know, again, you mentioned the philosophers, and that was born simply, it was facilitated through leisure. And, you know, for me, when I think of philosophers, I keep going back to, you know, dudes in togas sitting around having these discussions all day, not worrying about essentially where the next meal is. I mean,
yeah,
how could it work? Yeah, they weren't doing 15-hour days. They had time for these abstract discussions. So,
but I guess I agree. That's what he's saying. But the point obviously is that, and he must be kind of implying this, that the culture or whatever needs to value a certain kind of leisure and kind of create spaces for it, or try to get people to go in that direction. But the fact is, we live in a highly consumer-oriented culture that that basically wants to keep people fat and distracted and anesthetized mostly, and that might be a product of the fact that there is too much work, and so that they dish entertainment out to dull people's senses or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like at the heart of it, at the heart of the way in which, I don't know, leisure and distraction and all those sorts of things are set up in our culture, they aren't particularly healthy. We're not really goaded in the right direction in that sense. So I think some big things would have to change. And I think it does come down to things like marketing and advertising and consumerism and individualism. And I couldn't help but think of Binet. You know, everyone remembers that argument. Freud's nephew came to America and he used the psychoanalytic theory of Freud. This was in the 30s or just after the war, actually, just after the Second World War. And he realized, he kind of came up with a propaganda for peacetime. And his idea was that, look, yeah, there you go, Shannon's got it. And he had this idea that you could link consumer products to the libidinal needs that Freud had talked about in psychoanalysis, and then you could create more consumer products and then tailor them to the need satisfaction kind of process that was described by Freud. And that way you could keep inventing needs and selling more goods. And so people get locked into a cycle of kind of addiction to the next product or the feeling that they can satisfy some need so long as they can afford the next product or the next distraction. And I think we've gone way down that way of thinking, and that's a fucking terrible situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry. I just want to say that I agree, and I also think, again, the timing is important. So when he wrote this, they didn't even have black and white televisions, let alone VR, and, you know, so yeah, what was there to fill out your days? It wouldn't be as easy as, you know, Minecraft online or all these other.
But he does say that the pleasures of urban populations have become passive, and he's talking about the fact that people worked long hours. They didn't have enough energy when they got home in what leisure they did have to do anything active. And he said the pleasures of urban populations have become passive. Cinema, watching sport, radio, right? Because when they get home from work, they want to rest. So they weren't. So he was sort of saying we need to have leisure where people are more able to be broadly active, or at least have the potential to be more active. He said, "Where are the peasant dances?"
True.
I think that that's somehow deliberate on the ruling classes, that they would want the working class, the majority that supported them, to be too exhausted to read or learn how to read and those sorts of things across time. You know, I
think that even happens now. I think we're put lulled into this thing where we're just not capable of being active in the political.
That's kind of my point, is that obviously I'm drawn to this idea that Foucault is more interested in too, of power. Can you hear me? Because someone's asked a question about the volume. Yeah, and in the background is this notion of power. So if historically, you know, the conception of duty has been a means used by the holder of power to induce others to live for the interests of their masters rather than for their own, that's a quote. Yeah. Basically, why shouldn't we expect that the kind of propaganda should be adapted to more modern technologies, you know? So the means by which those who are in the ruling class, for example, control us now. I don't know whether there is such a thing as a ruling class now, but the status quo, for want of another word, has the technology, for example, to keep us controlled, and typically it's done through exploiting our need for entertainment and things like that. Again, I think he's right on the money where he's saying the right use of leisure would be an effective site of resistance. Like if we wanted to rebel against being controlled by external forces like that. If we're not enslaved by landowners anymore, then we have to free ourselves from the enslavement of those who want to make us passive consumers of entertainment and alcohol and things like that. What we need to become is able to use leisure effectively and actively and in an intelligent and rational way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The after that quote there that you're referring to, Courtney, about the concept of duty has been used by those in power to induce the workers to live in the interests of their masters. I think that's where you were.
Yeah.
Because leisure is the sought after good. The ones in power, they want leisure. That is the good. That's the good that they're seeking, and that's why they induce the workers to live live by this concept of duty in work. And then he said a bit about the war, and he said the war showed that by technological production, it is possible to keep modern populations in comfort on a small capacity of the working world, because there were so many people taken out into the war effort, and yet everyone at home still managed to survive quite well. And he said it could have remained like that when everyone came home, but instead the old chaos was restored, and some still then worked harder, and some were still left to starve, as in the unemployment lines. So he was saying, we could have learnt from what happened in the war, but we didn't.
Yeah, that part I thought was interesting, because what I was sort of wondering was like how true is that? Like I haven't studied World War One, so if anyone else has knowledge of like the economic situation after the war, I'd be curious. But like, was it actually true that they could have continued that into the future? Like, what was the cost of the way they were running the economy, all the businesses and workers and such during the war?
Well, I would think, sorry, can I jump on that for a sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I had the same question, and I thought, well, the obvious one is that, so like in New Zealand, for instance, a lot of the farming work was taken up by women and so forth. So they relinquished their normal roles, which would be childcare, for instance. So did the children suffer? I mean, that's, and so that would be one thing. The people that are doing those jobs are not doing what they were doing before. Perhaps they were idle, or perhaps not. And then another thing is that I think that the production will all be geared around, aside from munitions and things, the staples, the essentials. So not so much luxury goods and whatnot. But that's fine, because that's something that he talks about, is if people can get by with less, then they'll just have more free time, So we often trade our time for things that we don't really need, luxury goods, for instance.
I did have a question. I see where you're going with that, and I think that's a good point. If we were more frugal, we wouldn't need so much. That's true. But I also wanted to know, like, in that example you're talking about, Shannon, prior to the war, we could imagine he's talking about most people had a job or were at work or whatever. But I just had a quick Google of this, and I was curious about what the demographic differences were, for example, between here in Australia now, or at least in the last few years, and 1932. And I found out that in 1932, 85% of new houses sold for less than £750. And the average earnings were £165 per year. That's true. So that's today the average earning is $90,000 a year, and an average house is about $700,000. So there's like almost, it's not double, but inflation is an issue. And then I looked at an inflation calculator, because not only is it houses, but it's also everything. It's the cost of living. It's every tiny little detail. And I found out that £10 in 1932 is the equivalent to £563 now. So that gives you an idea of the CPI. So all the necessities of life have gone up too. And if you think about what I was saying before, where they've invented needs that need to be met, you know, with Binet and those sort of psychoanalytic marketing techniques, people think they actually need things that they don't need. So not only are the essentials are expensive, but these pseudo essentials are also lumped on top of that. Things like makeup and things like that, you know, that people can't live without. Those things are extremely expensive too. And just give you some idea, because I was interested in, you know, like how many people are actually in the workforce. And it turns out that in 2018 in Australia, 18% are on some form of disability. 802,000 people living in social housing. 1 million people received support from aged services in 2019. So we have an aging population. 500,000 unemployed. 195.7 billion spent on welfare-related services in the last year. And anyway, the list goes on. You get the idea. Basically, what it means is, and I don't know, Shannon would be better to work this out because he's good at maths and statistics, but we're already in a situation where there is 4 people working and 1 person is doing nothing, or whatever the number is. You can go and crunch the numbers. Do you know what I mean? Like in his picture, he's talking about everyone's working 4 hours a day, but actually that's not quite the picture in today's modern society. It might be 60 or 70% are working 4 hours every day, and the rest of them are doing nothing, meaning that the 60 or 70% who are working can't do 4 hours a day anymore. They've got to do 8 hours. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was actually just like quickly Googling that while you were talking. Like, so in 1932, the unemployment rate in the UK was 23%.
Really?
I think ours is like 3%. Yeah, I think it's like around 3.5. So yeah, it's definitely a very different. I think they're a little unemployed. And yeah, what I was thinking of that when you were giving those numbers is like you need like the per person, like to get a grasp of like how it is. But yeah, that's hard to know.
Was that the Depression, 1932? That was nearly the start. 33, was it? When did the Depression start?
Yeah, so on this website it's saying, unlike the US, UK unemployment was high before the Great Depression. The UK Depression was suppressed throughout the 1920s. So yeah, it
29.
Like it was a pretty like, they had like an ongoing thing. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm not sure when the Great Depression actually was.
It was 29 to 33 or something, wasn't it?
Oh, 29.
I was depressed throughout my 20s as well.
Hi, Ashley.
Hello.
You're just saving up for good quality comments. That was,
Yeah.
We gas bag along, and you're just like, no, I'm only going to say something that has something funny to say. And that was definitely high quality. So hold on.
Need a drum and cymbal kind of sound in the background when Ashley comes in.
Yeah, so what you're talking about before reminds me of Eric Fromm, right? He was writing in the 1950s. He was talking about how people were becoming automatons because it's not just that all work was given to them at a prescribed hour. He said that people would all take leisure at the prescribed hour, and they'd take what kind of leisure was prescribed to them. So he'd say, you know, you'd all go to the movies on Sunday, and you'd have a limited amount of, you know, you've got 3 or 4 films to choose from. You turn on the TV and you've got only a few channels. And then he said people go to a book club and then they get told what book to read.
That's our book club.
Yeah. And he says, you know, work plays into that the factory lifestyle conditions people to just be used to being told what to do. Because he said that people are being disconnected from their work, right? Because instead of completing a task, like completing a craft from its start to its finish, they just become segmented and just do one repetitive thing all over again. So you're not actually involved in the full process. And and he's saying that's what people need to be idle, so that then they have the chance to actually think about like what are they doing with their life, so they can live actively. Because he was, an existential humanist. It was like, what are you actually doing with your life? And he says that keeping people busy is a way of preventing people from achieving that.
Yeah, it kind of fits with this whole thing. That whole busyness thing kind of got me too. Like when we were talking about the pins example, for example, I just said example twice. When we were talking about the pins thing, it made me think of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Have any of you read that by Robert M. Persig? It's a really good novel.
Some of it.
Anyway, the idea in a section of that book is that people used to have to be excellent at everything. This kind of idea of the worker in the village was good at tilling the land, but he was also good at, I don't know, disciplining his children and making the soup stock and fixing
goat herding,
the whole thing, everything. But as things get busier and work necessarily becomes more specialized, and this is probably that problem with the pins example, because if everyone's doing the same task with the same set of skills, then there's not enough work for everyone to do. So what they do is they create more and more specialization. And so you can talk to older people. Like I met a geologist recently, and he was saying when he was a geologist in the field, he did everything. Like he did the bookkeeping and the notes and the drawings and the measurements and the whole thing. But now it doesn't work like that. Now he's expected to. Anyway, I got lost with that train of thought. I think I got mixed up. But anyway, point is we're becoming more and more specialized.
But wouldn't if you become more specialized, that means you're going to be more hard hit with that pin circumstance, like where you have more diversity with what you can do. You have more skills that are transferable. But if you have something that's hyper focused, like you're the expert at putting the sharp bit on the end of the pin, and that's the only other thing you know, and the machine you have to use for that is very narrow and only works in that area. But
it only breaks one part of the industry then, you see. So for example, in the pin example, he says, I did it again. He says, these people are making pins, everyone's busy making pins, and they saturate the market with pins. But then another company comes along and manufactures pins as well. Now there's too many pins, so it devalues the cost of the pins. No longer can people earn enough money to support themselves, and there's way too many people making pins, so half of the workforce lose their jobs. So one solution is specialization, right? And this is what actually does happen in academia. So Heidegger wrote that paper, and he talked about the endless busyness of academia, where now people do theses on, I don't know, like the monetary management of fiscal development in a third world country in 1432. I don't know, like they you know what I mean? And people are getting that highly specialized down to and you would see it in your industry, right, Shannon? There'll be people who specialize in one particular kind of coding or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, and that was sort of part of Henry T. Ford's success, wasn't he? Having specialization with his production lines in a factory setting, although I'm sure it happened earlier than that. The thing is that he actually recognized, or maybe since then in HR circles, that demoralizes your workforce. So what they would try and do then to offset the fact that people are losing interest in their work and losing motivation is that they might specialize in one role for a week or month or however long, and then they take them to another place where they would master whatever that particular small role is in a short period of time and then carry on. But yeah, I've worked in kiwi fruit pack houses, and I've seen that myself. You know, just it's funny though, because I think about some work that is very repetitious and not necessarily tiring as much as like a peasant toiling in the fields, you know, a few hundred years ago, but in a pack house setting where you do got a lot of time to think because the job becomes automated. You're a cog in the machine, so you can philosophize, but you can't do it in full capacity because you're chained to this machine and this routine. And if you wanted to Google something like you guys are doing as we speak, that's off the cards. And then, yeah, you're just resting your feet on those brakes, getting off the concrete floor for a moment.
Yeah, and it's also, yeah, I've done like similar sort of work, and it's like you do definitely have that. I agree, you do have that time to like think, but it's also like it's very half-efforted because at least where I was working, like you had a lot of safety concerns, and you've got a lot of machinery around you that could take off an arm or kill you, type of thing. So you can't like be fully like off thinking about things because you sort of have to be with it, but like focused to like what's around me, what's going on type of thing. So yeah, you're sort of in this weird middleware space where you can't like fully let your mind wander, but you're not fully concentrated either. You're sort of like a half dead sort of zombie type thing.
Yeah, that's right. Also, I think it's really important, and Russell hasn't mentioned this at all. What happens is that people that are in the leisure class, either it's voluntarily or non-voluntarily, they're unemployed, or a good proportion of them are just incompetent. You know, most people, there's some people that might be choose not to work and stay on the dole and they want to do meaningful things with their time, like read and write and so forth. But also a lot of people unemployed don't really have skills, or they're not smart enough, or whatever. So there is that. So for instance, you couldn't, say you've got a doctor and you want to make it such that he's forced to work half days, then you need to find another person to fill those shoes for the other half of the time. Well, it's probably not the guy sitting at the bus shelter drinking wine at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, that unemployed dude. So yeah, competent people there. And another point that's really important is that people derive pleasure from their work, not so much working in a factory generating pins or whatever else, but if you have a job that's self-actualization, it might be that you are a surgeon or a programmer or whatever. I don't know if they'll necessarily be happier working less. Maybe their job is such that they're expanding themselves through that work potentially.
Yeah.
So those the competence thing, and how that people that have less marketable skills and so forth tend to be unemployed. There's a correlation at least. And second, people that find their job invigorating and meaningful, that they'd rather work more.
Yeah, and like there's also too obviously like there's that large gap of training as well, of course. But which in some way, like I think if you did have like that more leisure time, like it allows people to explore topics. Like I like with my degree and stuff, like I sort of needed that time to like actually think about things, and like I left a job that was a lot less there's a lot more mentally intensive, and was working in a warehouse, and like that helped a lot with me trying to work out what I wanted to do. So sort of that stepping away, still working but not fully. So having that space can also help with people deciding that you sort of just constantly working, and then like Courtney said, playing Candy Crush or Minecraft, and then not, because you're just so exhausted, like you never have that moment to actually reflect, and that can take time to think about or develop that interest as well.
And it makes you wonder if the more these sort of hobbies and habits are out there, and the more people kind of indulge themselves in them, do they lose the capacity then to seek out a more stimulating kind of leisure? And I'm thinking about people I know who for years have just sat on their phone looking at TikTok videos, for example. If you ask them, like, don't you want to do something with your life and use your brain? They just give you an evil look, like, fuck off, leave me alone.
But so just one other thing, just before we get past it on this pin example, I was also thinking about this too. Like, it's sort of, I think this point can more broadly be applied to like everyday type of work, not this sort of very specific example of like there is this ridiculous increase in production line, but just in the day-to-day sort of type of work. Like, say someone actually gets their work done within like 2 hours. If you let your boss know you got that work done, you're getting more. Like the reward for, in a lot of places, there are some that are a bit better with this, but the reward for getting work done is you get more work. Like, so there is like that sort of thing where similar along similar lines, like there is something a little off about that. I don't know how you get around it, but yeah.
Oh man, Shannon, you've got to read Bullshit Jobs.
I have. Oh, well,
Have you?
Yeah, I've listened to the audiobook. I haven't read it.
Oh yeah. Same thing, I guess. But isn't that just such an eye opener?
Yeah.
Like where he's talking about, he says something like 40% of work in the economy is just unnecessary, like either directly or indirectly. You know, like he's talking about there's some jobs that are legitimate, like a cleaner, but if you're cleaning the office of a financial consulting or something like that, then that's just bullshit. But you know, it's like, isn't that crazy that it's just creating work? Like our paradigm is just for people to work, and so we just like these jobs are just invented, made up, and people just sit around twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah, well, prestige for management. Like that's what I worry about with like going into like the data science space. This is like, at least what I've read online. Not all jobs, but like some jobs are just there as a prestige thing for senior management, where it's like, oh, we're developing AI, we utilize AI, but they don't actually do anything with it. They've just got the team there, and it's just doing nothing. But yeah, I don't know how. I feel like the bullshit job stuff, like in my heart of hearts, I agree with it, but I feel like to fully embrace it, I'd need to like look properly at how he's sort of getting those numbers to be more confident on it. But I did like it.
May I just comment too, in relation to this also, that Bertrand Russell, when he was saying that the 4-hour working day, he was insinuating that people would make enough money to live on, that they would be getting the same wage basically somehow that would enable them to still live on this wage that would be allotted to them for their 4 hours a day. And that's not really, we couldn't do that really now, could we? Because we just the way the economy is set up, if everyone did only work 4 hours a day, would they make enough to live comfortably? I don't know.
Well, I think part of his point would be that it's just like similar to how we have like 8-hour rules and stuff like that. Like it's driving that down to the 4-hour line, so that you just like wages. I'm assuming his idea would be wages would stay the same. I think he was like was he a socialist? So I'm not sure exactly what his vision was.
Yeah, he was insinuating that people would make the same money. That's what he was.
Yeah, but on that point though, like, so if you look at how much work people actually do, I think it's about 2 hours out of an 8-hour day. So it's actually 2 hours of work that we really do. So, and that doesn't apply for all jobs.
I need your job, Shannon. I'd like to do 2 hours a day.
Yeah, so apparently, so it's like about 2 hours. That's for office jobs. So
that's why I'm saying 40% of work is just unnecessary.
Yeah.
So Jody, what he's talking about there is, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry.
I was just going to say this whole thing, right? The problem with that, it all sounds well and good in theory that if productivity increases, we need to work less. But the whole economic paradigm is based on continuous growth. So as long as that happens, people will have to keep buying more shit, either buying more shit or producing more, to continue this like this thing of continuous growth, because then otherwise it's stagnation, and then it's a recession and all this kind of thing. Because it makes so much sense, right? Just, oh yeah, we've got what we need, we can limit our desires, and then we've got time for the quality things in life. It was never going to happen.
So I think then that Russell's idea here about questioning the virtue of work needs to go together with questioning the virtue or the necessity of economic growth. You know, if they started to make the measure of success of a country and economy based on, say, happiness and health and these things, as opposed to growth, like consumption, you know, then this could work better, you know.
It also misunderstands the nature of a lot of different kinds of work. Like Woe Warden and me, we're tradespeople. So I might get paid per job. That means the more hours I do, the more money I get paid. So if I was working 4 hours a day, that would mean that I would have to double the charge as a tradesman that I charge the customer. So instead of it being $150 for a service, they're paying $300 for a service. They're not going to like that at all.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. What was the because we're very contractor heavy in Australia, with a lot of small little businesses. I wonder what it was like in the 1930s, like we mentioned, or the 1920s as well. The employment rate was 23%, which is just like unemployment rate. I mean, that's just insane. So yeah, it is a good point. Like, what does that actually mean for contractors?
Small business would have to work that way. He's talking about the kind of business that I don't know, sort of doesn't get paid item by item or whatever, you know, like service per service. He's talking about something.
And also too, like Vincent was mentioning about like hospitals and that sort of thing. Like they, you know, people don't get sick for just 4 hours of the day. That would be fully stocked. And there is a reason doctors and nurses work so long, because it seems like that is the case, that improves health outcomes, because you don't have higher swapovers. So if you actually did that type of thing, you have higher swapovers. But then maybe the way around that is that you have more doctors on. But then also too, you would have things like factory work and warehouse work, where they are working around the clock. Like, how does that work? I don't know. To me, the 4 hour thing is a bit odd. Like, to me, what makes more sense is like 4 days. Like that I can understand, but 4 hours is like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it wouldn't work.
It's all a bit anachronistic, isn't it? Because the guy's talking 100 years ago, and you know, and I reckon he was really far-sighted and prescient about, you know, what was, you know, where the world was heading. But it's still 100 years, and we, you know, we can still see stuff that's relevant to us. But yeah, it certainly can't speak to us perfectly in the climate we have economically. And may I just say too, his quote here, you know, when you're saying it's about the type of work we do, yes, and about our economic situation, yes, but he says the wise use of leisure is a product of education and civilization. So it's all about how do you actually get people to wisely use their leisure, and the source of that is education and civilization. And so that's a point I'd like for us to bring out a bit. And also the other bit I thought was interesting, where he says in that similar passage, something about dialectical, he's basically saying that dialectical materialism is like the new God. Back in his day, he was saying, do you remember there was a quote there?
Yeah, that was
about
Can you explain that to me? What is dialectical materialism?
So what it's referencing is that within the USSR, so they obviously at this time were communists, or working towards communism, embodied Marx. So they have this idea of dialectical materialism, which comes from Marx. Now, that version is pretty sure the way that they would have, like the USSR would have understood it, is more like Lenin Marxism, and there's like some dispute if that's actually exists within Marx. Like it's probably a relatively smaller part of this idea. But yeah, that's just what they're talking about. So it's basically like the equivalent, I guess, today. This wouldn't be exactly analogous, but like you could say like liberalism is the new God or something. It's just
actually,
I guess like Marxism is what you could replace there.
It specifically is a piece of Marxist theory. I'm just looking at the internet here. That political and historical events result from the conflict of social forces and are interpretable as a series of contradictions and their solutions. The conflict is seen as caused by material needs. So yeah, it's typical Marxist stuff.
So that's the dialectical part of it.
Yes, because like think of Hegelian dialectic. You got two opposite things
That's what
creating
it is.
synthesis. Yeah.
But it's like I don't know. I feel like I'll sort of just end up slandering the USSR on this, but it did, at least like when I read about it, it's not just like philosophy. It's like they go, oh, it's a science. It just seems kind of weird. I don't know. But yeah, that's sort of what it is.
On Jody's point, though, you were talking about leisure and wisely using leisure. Well, I've been working in a prison lately, and one of the big problems for drug addicts and recovering addicts, and they talk a lot about this in prison, is they don't know what to do with boredom. That's like a huge thing. They're like, because they got nothing to do. Most of them are unemployed or they're drug dealers, so they work for themselves basically. And well, they talk about it like that. And in the downtime where they're not working or being high, they're totally bored out of their brains and they got nothing to do with themselves. And so the more bored they get, the more they want to get high. And they actually they have a term, these meth addicts, it's hilarious. They told me about it the other day. They call it cracktivities. They do cracktivities. So basically it means they get high on meth and then they start doing all these activities, and they laugh about it. They say, you think you're really productive on meth, but no, we call it cracktivities. You just start a whole bunch of activities, like 100 different things. You might start cleaning out the freezer and the drawers and restacking the bookshelf and cleaning the carpet, but you only finish one or two things, but you start like 150 different tasks. And they thought it was really hilarious, but you know, it's an interesting point, this cracktivities, and yeah, it's sad, but true. This is exactly the kind of predicament that the uneducated are stuck with when it comes to leisure.
Hang on, did you just say meth addicts clean out their bookshelf?
Well, they call it cracktivities. They just start doing cracktivities.
Connie, not everybody reads. You know that.
Okay, whatever. I don't know. They start cleaning out the lint from their belly button. I don't know. Pick your example.
So do you think he's true then when he says education and culture will give people better leisure?
I definitely think so. And you know, one of the big takeaways with having a 4-hour day, or more realistically a 6-hour one, is that the free time, the leisure time, would be spent with your children. So then what it would mean is, instead of parents coming home exhausted, and there was some study, it was hugely depressing, something about the average quality time a parent spends is like like a minute or two with their kids per day. That sounds pretty far-fetched, but apparently so. If there was more time available and parents spent that with their children, the kids would be off the idiot box more so. They'd be reading stories, playing ball, etc. They would go into a generation of adults.
I can believe that fully, because I've seen, like, I mean, I take care of kids for work, and I've seen that's what happens. Hey, the parents come home and they just don't have energy. They just can't be fucked, and they'll just come home, open up a bag of chips, collapse on the couch, turn on the TV and start double screening while they're playing Bejeweled or scrolling Facebook or whatever. And then little Jimmy comes out and says, look, Mummy, look what I made for homework. And they just go, that's nice. That's nice. And then the phone rings and it's their crazy, demented parent ringing up. And then they go, oh, fuck, grandma's escaped again. I've got to go bring her to the hospital or whatever, right? And they're just like, poor little Jimmy, mum, no time. You know, mama has no time.
Your examples are way better than mine, Ashley.
I don't know.
I've seen this shit happen. That's why. You know, truth is stranger than fiction.
I'm looking forward to having the 1 minute time. I think that sounds good. Been staying home that too long.
Yeah.
He's got enough time out of me.
Well, that's a good point what you're making, because there's another quote a bit further down. There's some nice stuff there about feminism. I'll leave that alone. But anyway, in the West, he says, in the West, a large proportion of total produce goes to the small minority. And we know that, you know, the top 1% in the world has all the wealth, etc., blah, blah. So he's saying that even back then he was saying there's no economic justice, right? So, and that's been seen by many an economist, surely, hasn't it? That the fault lies in the distribution of wealth, and hence the Marxist, you know, theories that emerged. But that's a big part of it, isn't it? That whole problem of distribution. So really, the common wage, as you brought up, Vincent, early in the piece, when you were talking about the common wage and the pressure that's coming to bear on that. Last week, there was a push in the Parliament to push the unemployment benefit, the job seeker benefit, up to just below the aged pension amount, and that was squashed. That was it was decided that was undoable by the government.
You know how much that is?
Well, the pension roughly, I think, is in the high 400s, and getting up towards 500 a week, maybe, is it? It's in the 400s.
It's not enough to pay rent.
And the unemployment benefit sits about high 300s.
Oh.
So they were going to try and push it up to closer to the pension. But anyway, no, won't happen. So, you know, but anyway, this distribution idea is always been an interesting one. And the top 1%, I think someone was saying the other night, 1%, the top 1% would be like for us in Australia, earning roughly about over, I think it was about over 50 grand a year, roughly, or something like that. I don't think it was 80. I think it was less than 80. But it was like in Australian dollars, I think it was roughly about 50,000 Australian dollars a year or higher would put you in the bracket of the top 1% of the world or something. Maybe our stats can be checked on that. Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm wrong. But anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty true. There used to be an app floating around that someone showed me, and you put in your wage, and my wage is not huge, and I put it in and it said I was in the 96th percentile or something ridiculous. So yeah, it's just a given. But again, our cost of living is so fucking high.
Yeah, like housing prices here is just insane. With one of the highest ones, or at least in Melbourne.
So the elephant in the room is obviously AI. And so, Jody, you mentioned about how times have changed. I recently heard this week that supermodels are now out of work, very quickly becoming so, because they just use computer-generated images with photorealism. I mean, obviously, you need supermodels on catwalks, but mostly it's done via imagery and so forth. So,
and it's very true, you know, because I haven't even had a call this week.
yeah, true. No, they've got your avatar. Did you hear they oh shit, I heard this yesterday. Apparently the Gallagher brothers or whatever, they're having some spat that's ongoing. So Oasis has stopped recording, but there's this band called AI Oasis, and they put out a new album. So it's not them, but they sampled all their albums and shit, and they released it, and it sounds, and it's songs and everything. I mean, this is here and now. So what's that mean for employment?
Well, I had an argument, and I think this is more to the point, is that AI, they say, well, we're nowhere near AI, to be honest. ChatGPT is not AI. It's like an advanced autocorrect machine. I heard one guy explaining it something like that. But it's not real intelligence. And the idea is that, you think about a school teacher, there's a lot of work that they have to do that really doesn't have anything to do with what they're actually passionate about. So the idea of AI, what we call AI or whatever, might be able to do a lot of that kind of peripheral work, like pedagogy, putting together timesheets or curriculum planning or things like that, whereas the person can do the more creative elements of their work or do something more innovative. So I would like to think, or I would like to see people using technology more smartly, a bit like what he's talking about here, to free up your time so that you can be doing the more human aspects of the work and the more creative aspects of the work. I think if we're smart, we can definitely do that and create. It's not like we're going to lose our jobs if we're depending on the kind of work you're in. It might be more the case that you can do more with the kind of work that you're currently doing now. Like, for example, I'm a tradesman, but I've just worked out how to make a website, and I'm using AI to help me a little bit to do the things that I'm a bit shit at. And it's great, and what it means is I can have the things that I just possibly can't learn on my own. The AI takes over and does a lot of that other legwork for me and just does the work for me, and I just give it the commands, and it makes my business better, makes it look like there's a team, but it's not. So I'm hopeful.
Well, that'd be good. I have heard that trades type jobs are going to be one of the hardest to replace because of the nature of the work. I mean, I think in part robotics is lagging behind AI development. That's one thing, but yeah, you should go well. I did think that creative were untouchable, but that was last year, the year before. So,
I think one of the problems that AI is facing, like I mentioned about that band, I think like the copyright law, like they're going to get smashed down on it. Yeah. That's what I think is going to happen, because they're doing a lot of dodgy stuff. And I think it's awesome. Like some of it's just a bit questionable, where it's like, like just taking people's work and using it to produce something else. It's a little sketchy, and like I think the deciding factor of when this is going to blow up is once there's a court case where it's like yay or nay, this actually, like the copyright holder, if you whack it into an AI, they still have control or they don't. I think once that's sort of decided, I think that's when business will embrace it more. But until that happens, it's a bit sketchy. Like, for example, with like the ChatGPT, there was someone who wrote a book using it, but they couldn't publish it because it wasn't considered original work. Well, they could have copyright over it. So I think those sort of things need to be solved with what the rules are around that before it can be fully embraced. I do think it will have issues, or not issues, but like, yeah, that there will be alterations with what jobs exist. Who knows exactly what that would be, but I would be surprised if trades were that heavily affected, because yeah, like you said, it requires robotics to do that. But definitely like in like data space, and yeah, not sure. It'll be interesting to see how that sort of all works out.
Yeah, music will be an interesting one, because people, like you're saying, Vincent, they will have to buy the music because they love the physical people, because otherwise you could just buy AI music if you like the genre more than the actual people, you know what I mean? And also another one I definitely wouldn't want to be in the business of is anything to do with internet design or website building, because it's like we must only be around the corner when I can get a chatbot to say, write me a website and it has to have this, and I want an e-commerce shop, and I want it to do this, and I want you to connect to the Google SEOs and blah, blah, blah. the bot in the background will just write the code. Like, fuck, don't take that for a job. Don't go and study that one at university.
I think that's already him, that you can, they used it even just to design on a napkin to design a website, or you can text prompt. And now they have, it was text to photos, but now it's text to video. And there's a Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan interviewing Donald Trump. It's all fictitious. There's a disclaimer at the start, which is nice, but pretty legit looking.
Yeah, the voices are all AI. I saw one where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Trump, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, and someone else, and it sounds just like them. And Trump's getting the shits because his barbarian character is doing all this random shit. It's hilarious.
One other thing on the AI, which I think is interesting, like a recent development, is that a lot of the both Twitter and Reddit, which are large, like they're large, like text-based businesses, they're closing down their API, which is basically API is like how computers access websites. So there's other ways to pull it, but going through the API is more like the official thing. And so they're actually restricting their access because they want to control their data. Like those companies want to control their data and stop the businesses from accessing it. On a smaller scale, I think I shared this, but like there was like the Chasers actually closed their Twitter account and like the access to their websites to Google and stuff, because they don't want these bots being able to access their information. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that all sort of passes out. Like,
Like, I hope it all gets shut down, eh? I really do.
It won't get shut down.
Awesome. But
yeah, if that was what was behind the Twitter move by Musk, because that's what he's done, is he's just tried to stop the bots or AI infiltrating it and gathering all this, harvesting all this data. Yeah.
Do you think it would be better if it was like, you don't think the AI stuff is good?
Oh, fuck no. I think it's, I hate to say it out loud, but I think humanity may end this year. Just what I've been hearing about it and stuff. It's, there's something called an event horizon. It's just, there's all these predictions people make about when stuff's going to happen when, and it's exponential, but when it gets to recursive self-improvement, which for all we know, it's already happened and it's sleeping and monitoring now. Yeah, I read something today, it was horrific, about how AI would dispense itself with humanity, and there's all the Terminator scenarios, but there's this Russian, I think he's Russian, he's a strong believer in this outcome, and he said you can just email labs with a DNA sequence and they send back proteins, and he said then what you would do, and the AGI can fool or manipulate people, and they wouldn't know that they're responding to the orders from that, and then that just gets spread through the atmosphere and it goes into the bloodstream, and it has a timer attached, so it's at a specific time this toxin or whatever activates, and that's it, lights out. So,
well, we got 10 minutes left, guys. You're getting pretty crazy.
Yeah, sorry.
So
let's bring it back to Russell.
No, it's all right. Let's wrap up the Russell thing. So at the end, he says, and to get back onto what Jody was talking about too, right at the end, he's saying that even if everyone had a whole bunch of leisure time, not everyone's going to use it wisely. That's kind of a point he makes. And the quote goes, at least 1% will probably devote the time not spent in professional work to pursuits of some public importance. And independent of financial need, there will be no need to conform to the standards set by elderly pundits. So he's talking about the people in universities and academia there. And he says, well, my note is, I put in, this is where we're at kind of now with technology. So in a way, you're right, Vincent. Like we're at a period of, we could go one way or the other because the technology has given us a lot of freedom to do sorts of things. But finally, he says, good nature is the result of ease and security, not of a life of arduous struggle. So, I mean, I could agree with that. I think because he was talking about how the more we work and the tighter we are and the more we struggle, the more likely we are to relapse into war. But if we had more free time to cultivate peace and art and civilization, because of we'd be happier and more at ease and more secure in ourselves and our cultures, we'd probably get along better. And I thought that was kind of a nice way to leave it, a very optimistic way of putting it. What did you guys think about that?
Yeah, it was very optimistic, I thought, at the end there. That, you know, the public service, originality, you know, kindliness, that the taste for war would die out. The taste for war would die out. Good. Yeah, I thought it was very optimistic.
He's quite a utopian at the end.
Just before he comes to that last bit, though, he talks about, you know, the how the leisure classes, the upper classes were oppressive, not sympathetic. They justified their privileges, but it did result, like the ancient Romans and Greeks, as you were saying earlier, even in recent times, you know, the wealthy classes resulted in arts and sciences, books, philosophies, refined social relations. So we needed all this to become a civilized world, and but really the idle rich, as Vincent said, they weren't exceptionally educated or intelligent. And if you go across into what is academia, he said that even in university life, they are removed from the common people in activity and language, and, you know, so in a way, you know, even in universities, original thought is discouraged, he was claiming in the text here. Yeah. So, you know, so there were, you know, lots of, you know, how to cross over between the two, you know, how to get education out to the masses, and in a way that's as broad as possible. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I saw that as really positive, because isn't that what we're doing here, for example? Like, once upon a time, we would have had to go to university to have these discussions. But now, given the technology, Vincent's in New Zealand, you know, we're all over the place, and we're able to sit down and have a very high quality and high level conversation. I think that's one of the wonders of modern technology. Obviously, we're in the top 1% of people who know how to use our leisure time wisely.
0.1%, I think.
I'm still using it the other way too, though.
I think that point on the university life, I know I sort of bracketed, but just I was thinking about this because, like, my university, possibly there's going to be a strike because there's been like ongoing disputes and stuff with the teachers. So I'm not sure how true it is now that, like, he's sort of saying, oh, they're so disconnected from everyone's day-to-day existence. But, like, with how much they get paid now, I feel like they're, you know, they're like the working poor type of thing. If you're working in academia, like, it's very low.
Yeah, well, I suppose
the casualization of the workforce.
Yeah. Because he's talking 100 years ago. Sorry,
yeah,
Shannon.
You
know, yeah. And in those days, university life probably was far removed.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you had like that higher, like there was a lot. Well, probably not a lot of money, but there wasn't. You know, let's see if we can staff the teachers and see how well they teach. Of our mentality. But yeah, anyway, I was just something interesting.
Yeah, so we've come a long way. We've come a long way, but now it's sort of gone the other way, where they're not respected enough. You know, yeah.
I thought just one other point too on this whole, like, the feminine thing. I was kind of just looking up just quickly, like, what was the annual, like, feminine rate? That feminine lack of food. I can't say that word. Of, like, feminine, yeah. And, like, looking at, like, the graph is kind of like you have like 1920s, 1930s, and then it's like just goes doom. So in that way, at least we've gotten rid of that side of it. like just how, I think it's hard to remember, and this might be my own ignorance, but just how bad the Great Depression was. Like,
But we're on the verge of a massive famine worldwide, man. It's going to hit Africa hardest, but like, it's not only food and that comes out of Ukraine and Russia, it's fertilizers, the ingredients. And they were saying that luckily, because this is funny, this is an upshot of climate change. The winter was relatively mild. Well, that's a side point, because that's why Europe wasn't totally hamstrung by the gas embargoes and stuff coming out of Russia. But anyway, apparently the countries had enough surplus of fertilizer and food to get by. But if the war continues, there could be millions of deaths from famine. Not for us. New Zealand and Australia produce enough, but yeah.
In the Middle East and Africa, like you said, yeah.
Yeah, they're fucked.
I know, places like Yemen, Egypt. Egypt relied heavily on, grain from the Ukraine.
They used to be the granary of the Romans, though, eh?
Yeah, like they're countries with high populations, and they don't really produce a lot of agricultural products.
Well, they're just losing all arable land in Africa. I mean, it's just drying out. It's fuck all, And,
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and they have, the rich world, the birth rate's falling off. It's like Korea's like 0.79 per adult woman, whereas Africa's still up 4+, and there's not food to feed these babies. And it's just, yeah, man, the way the world's going, like climate change, the cusp of nuclear war, AI, all this stuff, it's just, there's several crossroads.
Well, we've been there before.
Hmm.
It's just the past 30 years or so. It's hard to adjust to that being the case again.
So the book that we read, the reading ended on a really positive note, and the book club ended on a really shit note. So why don't we offer a closing statement each to sum up what you thought about it? Okay. Someone?
I go first. I thought it was good. I did find some of its stuff a little questionable, or either from my own ignorance or not being confident on how accurate he's like presenting history and stuff like that. But it was a really enjoyable read, and obviously there was a lot to dig into. Yeah, I think like if I was to be critical of it, which is always my way, I did feel like I wish it had a more solid thread, because it kind of feels like he sort of goes on a little tangents, but I feel like it just needs just like a bit more punchiness to it, of like, this is my argument, this is what I'm going for. It just sort of goes off these like different points, and I don't think every paragraph is working well to build the argument. But yeah, it was enjoyable.
Right. I thought it was a really interesting read. Thanks for suggesting it, Vincent, because it reminded me that not all of the readings have to be super serious. That was a good one for everyone to jump in and discuss. That was and it's interesting how something as casual and kind of conversational as that produces really good conversation. It would be a great one to go in a way to go to a dinner party or something and have everyone read it before you go to the dinner party. Pretty good move. Maybe, yeah, there you go. I got to have a highbrow dinner party sometime. You're all invited.
Oh, we could do that, eh? We all have the same meal, like the same microwave dinner, and white wine in a plastic cup, and yeah. Sorry, I'll go if that's all right. Yeah, I like Shannon. I thought it's a bit flimsy in places, and I wish I mean it's really helpful for us to remind each other the context of early 1930s when he wrote it. you know, depression, war, all that stuff. But I think he could have laid it out a bit more clearly. Like he should have looked forward to the future, and it's like, okay, people are going to read this in the 80s or 2000s, and you know, just to explain more about what was happening. He sort of dropped hints of Mussolini, but it could have been a bit more there. And in places it was, so yeah, he sort of missed key points about why people work and things like that. But by and large, I like the way he's going with it, and he does make a strong point. And yeah, there's a lot to discuss about it, and I do feel that one thing that really stuck out for me was like about how the leisure class, or the aristocracy, the rich, have always found it outrageous, the idea that working class people would have leisure. And that really got me thinking, and I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like there's a bit of a class distinction just within my family. My old man's a lawyer, he's super rich. He had two weeks away on a bloody luxury boat, comes back 2 weeks work, and now he's in Tasmania, just coming back tomorrow. So it's just holiday after holiday, you know, because 2 weeks of law will afford you all that, you know. But yeah, so yeah, a good piece, and I thought it really there's some really interesting points raised and discussion there, and nice to have some sort of biblical and historical references in the mix too. And I'm so sorry that I went down a dark rabbit hole once again. Just,
It's all right.
I sort of get other opinions on this stuff, but yeah, all good.
Yeah, I'll just say that yeah, he's a remarkable thinker, obviously, from the volume of his work and what he did in his life and what he achieved. But you know, some of his essays have a slightly flippant tone, and this one was certainly, I thought, a little bit flippant in tone, and that he did jump around a lot. He had some great things to say for his day in this piece, that it did, like you say, it was a bit scattered. You know, he did jump around a great deal and brought out all sorts of various viewpoints and facts. But yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
What about you, Woe Warden?
I thought he didn't really consider inflation, like in the effects of inflation, and I'd imagine he should have known about them. But apart from that, he also, I don't think he mentioned competition amongst people. I mean, the upper classes that he's talking about, there's competition amongst them. Perhaps probably more so than there is amongst the workers that he refers to. And that kind of drives everything. He's kind of talking about a kind of a no growth society, and I don't think we've ever had that or wanted it.
That's a good point.
It is very good point.
What about Ashley? Is he around, or has he gone off?
Yeah, I was too lazy to read it. I've just been idle, so I've wanted to really embody the lessons of the book by not reading it.
You used your leisure time very well.
Yeah, thank you. Isn't like Bertrand Russel like not very good at getting facts right? Isn't that a thing?
Is that a fact?
I don't know.
I
didn't hurry to read it. Like I sort of thought, I can guess what this is going to be about, right? And it's pretty obvious, right? Like, why be busy? And you know, we all know what the problems of the world are and how they're being caused. But, you know, okay. But yeah, is he actually a good writer, or?
Actually, he never wrote anything. He got a chatbot to do it for him.
Okay. It's like, I know that like, so I've got this like big stack of Playboys from the 1960s and 70s. That's just like a cool thing I like to collect. And there's one where they interview him, and so I've just since then I've kind of got it stuck in my mind that he's like the kind of Alain de Botton of back in the day. So like not like a bit of a popularizer, but not great with the facts. So that's sort of, is that right, or like?
Well, his breadth of topics was so great. Like I've got a book that I got off my mother's bookshelf decades ago, and it's a book of short stories by him, and it's called Satan in the Suburbs. And it's just this really, it is totally not, it's just totally pop fiction, so it's a totally leisure crafted, purely in a leisurely way by him, and so a long way from any of his learned work. So he was obviously pretty a loose cannon.
Well, with like some of his writings, like he did write them more out of need than like intellectual desire. I'm pretty sure he went through a period where he was like financially in a pretty rough position. So that might be why some of the works are a bit average. The history of like Western philosophy, I can't remember, I used to know, but it had a lot of issues in it. And some of it was very, very flippant with his care of history.
Well,
so,
it's a big book, and it tries to go through every single philosopher that was a somebody.
Yeah, but there's books that do what he did better now.
Yeah.
And so it does definitely suffer where he like just some philosophers he just really hates. So he won't really put much effort into looking into their ideas. It's just not a particularly, and some parts aren't particularly well done. Yeah, but he does have like, he is like a serious philosopher, like even just having like that Principia Mathematica, like that was a very big influential work within logic and stuff. So it had large impact, but I definitely wouldn't recommend reading it because it is a logic book and it uses logic notation. So it is not going to be a fun time.
So he's a kind of Jordan Peterson of his time.
Well, he went to jail twice. He went to jail twice for his beliefs, and that's pretty big, I think, to be a conscientious objector,
I've been to jail about 8 times last week.
No, it was just for only the charges they know about. They don't know all the other stuff you've been up to.
Talking about charges and criminal offences, Vincent found a whole bunch of children's clothing in his classroom the other day.
In my where? What the fuck?
Isn't it in a classroom?
Yeah, okay. So do you want me to give the context?
Sure.
Oh, okay. So I'm in the Lego business. That's what I do for a crust. And we had a school holiday program in a church we rented, and kids leave some stuff. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some random shit. It's like a pirate's helmet and a fucking cap gun and a jersey and hoodie and stuff like that. So yeah, I see the relevance for me. Just trying to fucking deflect the bullet about the prison story. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to end the conversation, don't you think? It really segued nicely into pirate hats.
Yeah, true. What a pleasure, guys. I'm going to try and do way more of these meetings this year. And so what's the playbook? Is it going to be back to Plato, or is it, like, for me personally, I would like to try and get into Plato. I'm going to have to do some reading, but it would be sweet, probably, just from my point of view, maybe others, that if it was an alternate, so you have one author that you're doing a year study on, for instance, or 6 months, and then on the off week you do just a different reader each time, like last year. That would be pretty.
Yeah, we could do that. We'll do a fun one and then we'll do a serious one, something like that. I thought we might read Cicero next on ends, because that one always comes up when you're reading the Stoics. And it's in 5 books, and I posted it today, and they're short books. They're like 20, 30 pages each book. So we could get into that.
Was that De Finibus?
On ends,
Is it the
moral
same?
ends. So that's the one where Cato gives his account of Stoicism, as far as I recall.
Okay.
As far as I know. And we, like you said, Vincent, we can split it up so that every odd week is maybe something interesting that we want to read. I remember Ashley talked about some from, and he's also mentioned what was that, On Bullshit last year? Did we end up reading that?
I read it.
Oh, we did.
No, I read it. We didn't talk about it.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And another thing we could do, right, if you want to maximize your reading time, an idea I had was like if we just did like presentations or something, like put together a slideshow of a work, you know, and so, you know, yeah, and then just
That's a
listen to
good
someone.
idea. That's a good idea. I don't mind. I think that'd be great.
That could be good. How long would you need each? If there's 1, 2, 3, there's 6 of us, you'd need a discussion time. So 10 minutes each is an hour, and then a discussion, something like that.
Yeah.
All right.
And
We could
so
toy
would that
around
be
with that.
each person pulls in a different author that's talking about the same topic, like love or freedom or whatever? Is that how it goes, or are they just unrelated?
Just pick whatever you want.
Sorry, on anything you want.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we could do that.
You know, philosophy related.
Could we do it on a certain area of philosophy so that when the discussion's happening, it kind of jumps across from one to the other a little bit?
Just like anything you've just been learning about, or what, or something, you know, anything interesting.
Yeah, we could give it a go.
Where you just like pulling quotes from a text, putting it in a PowerPoint, and presenting.
Yeah, we could always try it.
Yeah, give it a go. We can give it a go.
Because I think a lot of these, like, because I did one on the bullshit thing and did it in a meetup, and probably saves a lot of time reading when. So, well, this is basically what it's about, and save all the, you know, there's a bit of you know, what you call it, like waffle in the text. That for the core concept of it is pretty simple, and then you can also, instead of just reading the text, yeah, because like also reading around the text and then put that into the PowerPoint as well, and so you got to, you know, like here's arguments, you know, here's other people's work, furthering the theory, and here's other people's work criticizing it, and that sort of thing.
So
The trouble is,
good talk.
in my, sorry, you go.
No, that's it.
I was just saying, in my books at home, because I write in the margins, if I was to read around the text, you just get lots of dick pictures and
But yeah, I think we could do it. If we did like it as like a, you know, just to see how it goes, we could just make it fairly general and just say around philosophy. And then if we think it sort of works, maybe we could do it around a specific, like, yeah, like you were saying, which I think is a really good idea, around a particular topic. But yeah, maybe for just the first one, if we just keep it general, just to make it more easy, and then if you like it, you can do more. I don't know. That's just.
Yeah, well, we'll throw this back and forth. We got like 3 different things going on there, so that'll be great. All right, guys. Well, you have a great night. And thanks, Vincent.
Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent.
Well, thanks for the leadership too, Courtney. I was out in the branch there, and you know.
You did really well. It's great. See ya.
All right, see you guys.